The Silent Village. Chapter 1: The Silence of Whistling Pines. The sun was sinking low on the horizon as Daniel Foster drove his rusty pickup truck along the winding road that led into the remote village of Whistling Pines. The trees lining the road loomed tall and foreboding, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Daniel had never heard of Whistling Pines before today, but the urgent letter from his old friend, Ethan, had brought him here. "Daniel, I need your help. Something terrible has happened in Whistling Pines. Come quickly, and whatever you do, don't speak when you arrive." The cryptic message had been enough to send Daniel packing. He had known Ethan since college, and if Ethan was in trouble, Daniel would be there for him. But as he entered the village, a chill settled in his bones. The place was eerily quiet, almost as if it were frozen in time. The streets were deserted, and the windows of the quaint, old-fashioned houses were dark. Daniel parked his truck in front of a small general store and stepped out. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and even the wind seemed to have died, leaving the village in a suffocating silence. He looked around, searching for any sign of life, but the village appeared abandoned. As he walked through the empty streets, Daniel's unease grew. Where was everyone? The village was supposed to be small, but not a single person was in sight. It was as if the entire population had vanished into thin air. Then he saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the street, partially obscured by the fog that had begun to roll in. Daniel squinted, trying to make out the figure's features, but before he could call out, the figure quickly disappeared into the mist. His heart raced, and he quickened his pace, hoping to catch up to whoever it was. As he approached the spot where the figure had been standing, he found nothing but an old, crumbling fountain. He was about to turn back when he heard a soft rustling sound behind him. Daniel spun around, but there was no one there. Just the silence, thick and oppressive. He shuddered and decided to head to Ethan's house. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. Chapter 2: The Silent Encounter. Ethan's house was a modest cottage on the outskirts of the village, nestled against the edge of the dense forest that surrounded Whistling Pines. The place looked just as Daniel remembered it, but the windows were shuttered and the door was slightly ajar. Daniel approached cautiously, pushing the door open with a creak. "Ethan," he called out, his voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. But as soon as the word left his mouth, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through his head. He doubled over, clutching his temples as the pain intensified. It was as if the very act of speaking had triggered some invisible force that was now punishing him for breaking the silence. Gritting his teeth, Daniel forced himself to stay quiet. The pain gradually subsided, leaving him gasping for breath. What was going on here? Why had speaking caused such an intense reaction? He entered the house, moving quietly through the dimly lit rooms. The place was eerily quiet, just like the village outside. He found Ethan in the study, sitting at his desk with his back to the door. Relief washed over Daniel at the sight of his friend, but it was short-lived. As he approached, he noticed something was terribly wrong. Ethan was completely still, his head bowed, as if he were deep in thought. But when Daniel touched his shoulder, Ethan slumped forward, revealing the blood-stained papers scattered across the desk. His throat had been slit, the wound jagged and brutal. Daniel recoiled in horror, his mind reeling. Ethan was dead, murdered in cold blood. But who or what had done this? And why had he been warned not to speak? His eyes fell on a notebook lying open beside Ethan's lifeless hand. The pages were filled with hastily scrawled notes, the last entry catching Daniel's attention. "They took our voices. It comes for those who speak. The creature. The shadow of silence. We can't escape. If you find this, Daniel, don't speak. It will hear you." A chill ran down Daniel's spine as he read the words. The shadow of silence? A creature that punished those who spoke. It sounded like something out of a horror story, but the evidence was right in front of him. Ethan had been silenced permanently. Daniel took a step back, his thoughts racing. If this creature was real, then it must still be out there, hunting anyone who dared to break the silence. And if he wasn't careful, he could be next. Chapter 3: The Village's Secret. Determined to find out what had happened, Daniel searched the rest of the house. He found more notes hidden in various places, each one piecing together the village's tragic story. Whistling Pines had once been a vibrant, bustling community. But everything had changed a few months ago when the villagers began to experience strange occurrences, whispers in the wind, shadows that moved on their own, and an overwhelming sense of dread that settled over the village. Then, one by one, the villagers lost their ability to speak. Any attempt to do so resulted in excruciating pain, and those who persisted disappeared without a trace. Ethan's notes suggested that the villagers believed they had angered an ancient spirit that dwelled in the forest, a spirit that demanded silence as tribute. The spirit had manifested as the Shadow of Silence, a creature that fed on sound and punished those who dared to break the stillness. Desperate to appease the creature, the villagers had resorted to silence, communicating only through writing or gestures. But it hadn't been enough. The creature continued to claim victims, leaving the village in a state of perpetual fear. Ethan had tried to find a way to break the curse, to rid the village of the creature once and for all. But it seemed his efforts had cost him his life. Daniel felt a surge of anger and determination. He couldn't let Ethan's death be in vain. He had to find the creature and stop it, no matter the cost. But how? The creature was clearly powerful, and it seemed to know whenever someone spoke. Daniel couldn't risk making a sound, not if he wanted to survive. As he pondered his next move, he noticed something odd about one of the notes Ethan had written. It mentioned an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of the village, near the forest. According to the note, the church had once been a place of worship for the villagers, but it had been abandoned years ago after a tragic accident claimed the lives of several townspeople. Ethan had believed the church held the key to defeating the creature, but he hadn't been able to explore it before his death. Daniel knew what he had to do. If there was even a chance that the church could help him stop the creature, he had to go there. Chapter 4: The Shadow of Silence. The sun had long since set by the time Daniel reached the old church. The building was in ruins, its walls crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the forest loomed ominously around him. He pushed open the rotting wooden door and stepped inside. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. The pews were covered in dust, and the altar was draped in cobwebs. But as Daniel moved deeper into the church, he felt a strange energy in the air, a presence that made his skin crawl. He reached the altar and found a worn, leather-bound book lying on it. The book was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, but the words were still legible. It was a journal written by the village priest who had served at the church before it was abandoned. The journal told of a ritual performed by the priest in an attempt to protect the village from an ancient curse. The curse had been placed on the village by a vengeful spirit that had been wronged by the villagers long ago. The spirit demanded silence as retribution, and the priest had sought to appease it by performing a binding ritual. But the ritual had gone horribly wrong, unleashing the very creature that now terrorized the village. The Shadow of Silence had been born from the spirit's wrath, a creature that fed on sound and punished those who defied its demand for silence. The priest had tried to stop it, but he had failed, and the creature had claimed him as its first victim. But there was a way to defeat it. The journal detailed a counter-ritual that could bind the creature and banish it from the village. The ritual required a few specific items: a silver bell, holy water, and the blood of a willing sacrifice. Daniel's heart sank at the last requirement. A willing sacrifice? That meant someone had to give their life to stop the creature. But if he didn't perform the ritual, the village would remain trapped in silence, and the creature would continue to hunt. He had no choice. He had to try. Chapter 5: The Final Confrontation. Daniel searched the church and found the silver bell and a vial of holy water tucked away in a cabinet. The final component of the ritual, however, would be the most difficult to obtain. He left the church and returned to the village, making his way to the center of town. As he walked, he could feel the creature watching him, its presence growing stronger with each step. The fog thickened and the air grew colder. Finally, he reached the village square, where a large stone fountain stood. The creature was there, waiting for him. It emerged from the shadows, a tall, featureless figure cloaked in darkness. Its form seemed to shift and ripple, as if it were made of the very shadows that surrounded it. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding the silver bell in one hand and the vial of holy water in the other. The creature watched him silently, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Without a word, Daniel began the ritual. He rang the bell, the sound piercing the silence like a knife. The creature recoiled, but it did not flee. Daniel sprinkled the holy water around the fountain, creating a circle of protection. Then came the final part. He took a knife from his pocket and made a small cut on his palm, letting the blood drip onto the stone of the fountain. The creature hissed, its form growing more unstable, as if the ritual was weakening it. But it wasn't enough. The creature was still too strong. Daniel realized what he had to do. He had to give more, to sacrifice more. Without hesitation, he stepped into the circle and slashed the knife across his arm, the blood flowing freely. The creature screamed, a terrible, guttural sound that echoed through the village. The ground trembled and the shadows began to recede. Daniel's vision blurred as the blood loss took its toll, but he forced himself to stay on his feet. He had to finish this, to see it through to the end. With a final effort, he raised the bell and rang it one last time. The sound reverberated through the air, shattering the silence that had held the village captive for so long. The creature let out one final, agonized scream before it dissolved into nothingness, its form disintegrating into the night. The fog lifted, the air cleared, and the oppressive silence was broken. Daniel collapsed to the ground, his strength fading. But as he lay there, he heard something he hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the distant chirping of birds, and the faint murmur of voices as the villagers began to emerge from their homes. He had done it. He had broken the curse, freed the village from the creature's grip. But at what cost? As darkness closed in around him, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He had avenged his friend, saved the village, and put an end to the nightmare. The silence was gone, and with it, the shadow of silence. The villagers would speak again, live again, and remember the sacrifice made to give them back their voices. If you enjoyed the chilling story, then make sure to like, subscribe, and stay close, because the next scaring story is just around the corner.